long ball. It's going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow.
It is Baker Mayfield.
I woke up feeling dangerous.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to emergency edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. We actually have some, I guess it's not really breaking news anymore, but it's close enough. But I won't reveal that to you until I introduce my co-host, Jack McCurry of North Post Sports. How you doing today, Jack?
I'm fired up, man. It's a good day to be a Cleveland Browns fan.
Absolutely. And, we're obviously here because the Browns have officially hired Freddie Kitchens as their new head coach of the Cleveland Browns. So we are absolutely excited for that. We recorded yesterday with Stephen Thomas, and we really went into great length about Freddie and why we thought the Browns should go in that direction. And thankfully, they did go in that direction. So, Jack, when you're looking at this hire, this coaching search you can almost say it took since Hugh Jackson was let go, because you saw obviously Greg Williams put himself out there as a candidate with the turnaround, obviously Freddie Kitchens, and then so you can say that this coaching search took 2-3 months, and it seems to have basically interviewing Freddie Kitchens that long. They were able to find out what kind of guy he's going to be leading this franchise, and they finally made that decision today to officially give him the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at it, he got a 8-game audition, and then you got to see what he was able to do behind the scenes. And I'm sure John Dorsey kept a close eye on it and, kept him in his back pocket. And then obviously the official search started after the Baltimore game. They interviewed 7 candidates, and they had Freddie Kitchens be the last one. And I think they let him, be prepared for this, because it's arguably the biggest interview of his whole career. And I mean, from what I heard, Freddie had a great interview. Had some people in the room kind of double take, like, wow, we really didn't expect this out of Freddie. And, everybody in the committee obviously came away with a consensus that Freddie was the guy. And now he's the new head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And
obviously, when you look at your head coach, you want him to have a fantastic relationship with your quarterback. And we saw through those 8 games the relationship between him and Baker Mayfield. You saw some things on those NFL films, mic'd up editions, some of the interactions that those two guys had. And you could tell that they really enjoy being around each other on a football field. And when you have a relationship between quarterback and offensive coordinator, now quarterback and head coach like that, it can only mean great things for the franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at the end of the day, you want him to have a great relationship with the whole roster. But when you look at it and see the relationship that he has with Baker Mayfield and, their interactions on the sidelines and everything. And obviously, people took put a ton of criticism towards the two for the one gesture that Baker made on the sideline following the touchdown pass to Darren Fells. I think it was against the Cincinnati Bengals. Kitchens, played it off. Baker played it off like it was nothing. But, you can just see that those two have a very strong relationship. And it makes you wonder if those two grew closer when there was, the rift going on between Hugh and Haley. And, you can just see that they do have a strong bond, and hopefully it leads to great success for the Browns in 2019 and beyond.
Absolutely. And, I think with, you talk about this relationship a little bit, and reportedly Baker Mayfield was FaceTimed into some of the interviews that the Browns had for their head coach. So, Jack, what's your overall opinion on Baker being FaceTimed into some of these interviews? Maybe not potentially having a say, but being aware of what's going on during that interview process.
I mean, with Greg Williams, he talked about how Baker Mayfield was the supreme leader. I wouldn't have necessarily put just Baker into those interviews. I think there's more than just him as leaders on the team. I mean, you look at guys like Christian Kirksey, Myles Garrett, Joel Bitonio, among others. Like, there's a ton of leadership on this team, but I think there's only one supreme leader, and it's Baker. And, I do feel a little iffy about him being involved in the interviews, but at the end of the day, at the biggest relationship that Freddie was going to have is with Baker Mayfield. He's the offensive mind that I think the team's been searching for to pair up with Baker. And obviously at the end of the day, that's the guy that probably should have the most input off the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that he's the supreme leader, and obviously the quarterback's the face of the franchise, and it was there's no doubt about it that Baker was the one that led that comeback this season. He helped turn things around, so there's no doubt that he's the leader of this football team. At least on the offensive side, you could say that there may be a couple guys on defense that leads that side of the ball, but there's no doubt in my mind that Baker speaks for everyone on that roster. There's a bit of relief, I guess you could say. I believe you said his name was Charles Robinson. He said that Freddie Kitchens reports directly to John Dorsey, which is vastly different with Hugh Jackson, who reported directly to Jimmy Haslam. So obviously it seems that the structure is finally how it should be. Hopefully things don't change, and it seems that John Dorsey, after a year plus, has finally got his influence into that organization of how things are properly run, and they finally have that power structure correct with Freddie Kitchens reporting directly to John Dorsey.
Yeah, it really looks like that Jimmy Haslam is finally backing off and is letting the people he hires do their job. And, that report came out just before we started recording, and to see that John Dorsey is the man that Freddie Kitchens has to report to, that's how things should be. No offense to Jimmy Haslam, but his track record as owner hasn't been that great since he took over the team in 2012. When you look up the word dysfunction, Jimmy Haslam's name and picture was probably next to that definition. But it looks like now that things are heading in the right direction with this organization, with John Dorsey as the general manager, pretty much the leader of that organization. There's still going to be ownership, and they still have to sign off on moves and stuff. But to see that they trust in John Dorsey and that they were in lockstep on the hiring of Freddie Kitchens, it looks like things are starting to go on the upswing for the Cleveland Browns. And, that's music, I think, to everyone's ears, because the last few years under Haslam's leadership, it had been a disaster prior to John Dorsey coming along.
And for what it's worth, I know we won't talk too much Columbus Crew on here, which Jimmy Haslam now owns, but I've seen a lot of positive reaction from the way that he has set things up down there as well. So maybe it took him some time to, it's good. There's going to be tough lessons when it comes to owning a sports franchise, and hopefully he's learned some of those lessons now. Now that he has two franchises, it seems like things are finally going in the right direction for him, and hopefully it can only mean good things for both of those franchises moving forward. According to Les Levine, who I've been a big fan of for many years and have enjoyed watching / listening to him, and he was on 92.3 The Fan today, and he said the Browns offered Mike McCarthy the head coach position, but there was a mandate that they had to keep Freddie Kitchens. Now, we heard rumblings of this, but if this is true, Jack, it speaks to how highly they think of Freddie Kitchens, and for McCarthy to say no, you had this potential ugly marriage like they had with Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley. They had the potential to do that again, and thankfully the Browns just completely bypassed that and went to the guy that they really wanted.
Yeah, I think from the start of the coaching search, I think the organization wanted to keep Freddie Kitchens at some capacity just because of the bond that he had with Baker Mayfield and the success the offense was having, those final 8 games. It wouldn't shock me if that report was true, that they wanted to hire McCarthy, but they wanted to keep Freddie at the same time. And I think, with McCarthy, he wants to call his own plays. He wants to run his offense. I don't think he was going to surrender his offense to Freddie Kitchens or anybody that he could potentially hire as an offensive coordinator. So at the end of the day, I think the Browns made the right move. You're going to want to keep Freddie just because it looks like that success is working. You don't want to risk the potential of losing Freddie in a year if he was going to be offensive coordinator under somebody else's head coach, and then Freddie gets a head coaching gig in 2020. So, while Mike McCarthy's track record looks like, his track record was solid at Green Bay, it looks like there is more to that situation and to why he was fired by the Packers at the end of the season, because we've heard rumblings about a potential rift between him and Aaron Rodgers, and maybe it's more on McCarthy than it is Rodgers at this point.
Well, it appears that the search committee, which we highlighted a couple episodes ago, of Jimmy Haslam, J.W. Johnson, John Dorsey, you could fill in the rest, but it seems that there wasn't a unanimous decision on that committee of who they should hire. The other guy that seemed to come down to was Kevin Stefanski, the offensive coordinator or the interim offensive coordinator of the Vikings, and it appears there's a report out there from Pro Football Talk today saying that the analytics people on the Browns really like Stefanski. When you hear something like that, Jack, obviously there was the huge analytics debate when Sashi Brown was here and when he was let go. When you hear something like that, do you just completely kind of brush it off and think that it's no big deal, or do you think that the potential rift on that search committee should be taken note?
No, I don't think there was any rift at all. I think, first of all, now, when it seems like everything's in place, if there's any reports about a potential rift, I think it's for clicks at this point. And, you've seen some of the local media members, Daryl Ryder of 92.3 The Fan, Dan Lobby of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, both came out and said, I don't think there was a rift. I think they're just probably debating and, somebody heard something wrong and, is a mole and reported it to one of the national writers. But, I think we can all agree that John Dorsey does accept analytics, because when you look at who he picked with the number 1 pick, and I'm talking about Baker Mayfield was one of the top rated quarterbacks when it comes down to analytics, and every statistical category Baker was first in, and that's strong analytics right there. I'm sure Stefanski had a following in that organization and on that committee. Based on Mary Kay Cabot's writing, John Dorsey is the one that brought Stefanski's name to the table. And I'm sure he had a solid interview, and I'm sure the Browns tried to figure out a way to keep both Kitchens and Stefanski, but Stefanski went ahead and went back to Minnesota, where he's now the full-time offensive coordinator for the Vikings. So I'm sure they would have liked to keep both, but at the end of the day, I think they had to go with Kitchens, because you can't go wrong with looking at what he did during those final 8 games. And like we've mentioned numerous times already, the relationship he has with Baker.
So obviously there's a need for the Browns for both an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. Now, they could potentially not have an OC. They could have a setup like the LA Rams do with having a passing game coordinator and a running game coordinator. Jack, if you had any idea, any inkling of who could potentially be up for one of those spots. I know I threw Adam Gase off the air. I know that could cause an issue, being that He came recommended to Haslam for head coach for Peyton Manning, apparently. But, he could fill one of those spots, or are there any other guys across the NFL that you think could potentially fill one of those coordinator spots on offense?
I mean, I don't have the slightest clue, to be honest with you. I mean, if there was anybody, maybe they were anybody that worked with Freddie at any point when he was in Arizona. But they might already be heading to Tampa to work with Bruce Arians. I don't think Byron Leftwich ever crossed paths with Kitchens. I could be wrong, but he's now going to be the offensive coordinator, and he's going to actually call the plays under Arians, which is surprising. I think everybody assumed that Bruce Arians would call plays, but Leftwich is going in that direction. But I do think Freddie's going to call plays. I would expect that he'll, like you said, hire a pass game coordinator and a run game coordinator. And I'm sure there'll be people out there that are saying, Freddie should hire an offensive coordinator to take the pressure off him. But if you look across the NFL, there's a lot of coaches that do call their own plays. Sean Payton, Sean McVay. I think Doug Peterson calls his own plays. So I wouldn't really fret over that. I'm sure Freddie will be okay, and I'm sure he's going to surround himself with people he trusts to take the load off on some of the things he has to do as a head coach to ease the load in his first year.
I thought of another name. What would you think? And they actually brought him into the head coaching interviews. What would you think of Jim Caldwell, who was formerly with the Detroit Lions, of potentially being one of those coordinators, or maybe even the offensive coordinator?
Yeah, it's a definite possibility. I could see him being a pass game coordinator for sure. I know he's working with the XFL that's getting ready to relaunch next year. So I don't know if he's wanting to get back into the NFL. I know he interviewed for multiple teams. He has a track record of working with quarterbacks, but I think our QB coach position is filled, from my understanding. So we'll see how it goes. But Caldwell definitely could be an option. I know when we did interview him, I didn't think he'd be a head coaching candidate, but I could see him potentially in a coordinator role. Okay,
talk about the defensive coordinator now. The Browns did release Greg Williams from his duties on the defensive side of football, and obviously the interim head coaching spot. So what would you do in terms of defensive coordinator now? Because obviously you're going to be looking for one, and I don't care whether a coordinator runs a 4-3, whether he runs a 3-4. We've talked about on here how the nickel defense is pretty much the new base defense in the NFL. And obviously you have a lot of guys on this defense that you need to play to their strengths, especially Myles Garrett. So when you're looking at this list of potential defensive coordinators, who really interests you on this list?
The name at the top of the list, and that's former Colts head coach and former Ravens defensive coordinator, Chuck Pagano. I mean, you look at his track record. He worked with the Baltimore Ravens for many years as the secondary coach, and then he was the defensive coordinator for a year before he ultimately took the head coaching position with the Indianapolis Colts. I think we've all seen how dominant that Ravens defense has been for the last 20, 25 years, and since they moved to Baltimore from Cleveland. And Pagano, his resume speaks for himself. He would be a guy that's be on the top of the list. Unfortunately, Todd Bowles was a potential defensive coordinator. He's going to take the position in Tampa under Bruce Arians. I could have seen the connection there with him and Kitchens, or maybe Kitchens could have lured him to Cleveland, but obviously Bowles would appreciate or would love to work more in Florida than Ohio, which I can't blame him for that because of the weather. Other guys, Chris Richard, the defensive backs coach for the Cowboys, would be a potential option, but it looks like he's going to get the head coaching gig in Miami. Vance Joseph's out there, who was a solid defensive coordinator in, I think it was Miami, and, he just got fired as the head coach of the Broncos. But he could be the next coach of the Bengals. That's still up for debate. And then, another name that's floating out there is Steve Wilkes, who just got fired in Arizona. He's got a track record on the defensive side of the ball. So there's some solid options out there. It'll be interesting to see who Freddie's going to bring in. I know a lot of people wanted them to keep Greg Williams, but I think at the end of the day, the only way Greg Williams was staying is if he was going to be the full-time head coach.
Is there anything else you want to say about Greg Williams? Because obviously, he did a fantastic job helping the Browns turn that abysmal season around, and leading the Browns to a fantastic record to close out the year. Is there anything you want to say to Greg as we say goodbye to potentially one of the better coaches that we've had since '99, but unfortunately he wasn't good enough?
Just thank you for what you did for this organization, Greg. I think, when you look at it, I remember when, the coaching changes were made and he was made as interim head coach. I was kind of like, we'll see how this goes. But obviously he was put in that position because John Dorsey and them knew that he would get everybody on track, and he was, going to bring that toughness, that discipline that team needed. And he made those boys work, and it showed on the field. Him and Freddie Kitchens, they weathered the storm, and they put together some of the best football that, we've seen as Browns fans in a long time. And, I know Greg, a lot of people don't like him because of Bounty Gate, and a lot of people don't like him because of the things he says, and everybody's going to make fun of him because he said he had head coaching gigs lined up. Well, there's only like 2 or 3 left available. Maybe he can get one still at the last minute. But, at the end of the day, Greg, made Browns fans believe again in this team. So I got to tip my hat and say thank you.
He could have a head coaching job just as long as it's not in Cincinnati. I would be upset if it was in Cincinnati. But, there have been other changes to the coaching staff already. Ken Zampese is out as the quarterback coach, and famous Amos Jones is out as special teams coordinator. So obviously Freddie has wasted no time in starting to shape that coaching staff the way he wants. Is there anything else you want to discuss about the coaching, hiring Freddie or whatnot before we move on to picking some of these divisional football games this weekend?
I just want to add before we do move on to the next topic, assistant offensive line coach Mark Hudson has been let go. Defensive quality control coach Eric Sanders has been let go. Ryan Lindley, who was brought in to coach the running backs once Kitchens was elevated to offensive coordinator, he's staying on, and I'm pretty sure he's going to become the quarterbacks coach. And then receivers coach Adam Henry and defensive backs coach Dwayne Walker are also reportedly going to stay, and that's according to Cleveland.com.
Do you think it's possible that Greg Williams' son could be the defensive coordinator of this team?
I think there's a chance, but I would probably think that Blake will go wherever his dad ends up, whether his dad – and if his dad decides to retire, I mean, he's 60, he's coached in the NFL a long time. Maybe Blake has an opportunity, but I would think Blake will probably move on as well. It sounds like, and this goes courtesy of Lane Adkins of the Orange and Brown Report, it sounds like the defensive side of the ball is going to be nearly wiped out. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes on that side for sure.
All right, let's pick some football games for this weekend. First off, we have the Indianapolis Colts and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Colts did a fantastic job last week shutting down the Houston Texans offense. Do you think that they could do the same thing 2 weeks in a row and shut down this high-powered Kansas City offense and knock out the top seed in the AFC?
I really do. I am a believer in the Indianapolis Colts. We talked about how Matt Eberflus has been doing a solid job, and I definitely believe that, that defensive side of the ball is playing with fire, and they're playing some dominant ball. But also on the offensive side, you got Andrew Luck, who's having an amazing comeback season, probably will win comeback player of the year. Marlon Mack, their running back, has been, chewing up defenses. And, of course, you got T.Y. Hilton, who is a deep threat always on that Colts offense. I think the Colts are going to win this game. I think they're going to knock off the Chiefs. I don't think the Chiefs' defense is that good. I think they can definitely put up some points, but I think the Colts will match them step for step, and I think their defense gets them the victory.
All right, let's talk about the other AFC game. We have the New England Patriots playing host to the Los Angeles Chargers. I actually got that right for once. To me, this seems to be the real upset special of the week. A lot of people are high on the Chargers after their win last week. And do you think the Chargers have a shot in New England to go into Foxborough and knock off the Patriots?
I definitely think they have a chance. Their defense is also playing solid. And I think in the postseason, the offenses get teams to the playoffs, but then the defense wins them the playoff. But at the end of the day, I can't go against New England, especially at home. They're undefeated at home this year, and it's playoff time. It's money time for Belichick and Brady. As much as I want to see Phillip Rivers have a shot at the Super Bowl, I'm going to go with the Patriots on this one.
All right, let's go over to the NFC, and the magic of St. Nick continues with Nick Foles, and he'll need some of that magic as the Eagles take on the New Orleans Saints down in New Orleans this weekend. Is there any chance that St. Nick can keep this magic going and somehow pull out a victory against the New Orleans Saints?
See, this is a tough pick for me because I am a believer of Nick Foles, and I think the debate that's going on between do they keep Nick Foles or do they keep Carson Wentz, I think that's going to be one of the most interesting storylines of the offseason for sure, especially if the Eagles continue to roll. But I picked the Saints in the preseason to go to the Super Bowl to represent the NFC, and I'm sticking with that pick. So I say the Saints beat the Eagles in this one.
I actually think both you and I picked the Saints to reach the Super Bowl, but we won't mention who we picked from the AFC to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. We just won't go there. All right, the other NFC game, we have the Dallas Cowboys, who came off a fantastic win against the Seattle Seahawks last weekend. They'll be taking on the Los Angeles Rams and another high-powered offense. This is going to be another great matchup of a high-powered offense versus a really good defense. So, do you think the Cowboys can do enough defensively to hold the Rams down and come away with a victory?
Well, I actually just looked it up and I lied. I picked the Rams to go to the Super Bowl in the NFC. So for this game, I'm going to have to pick the Rams so I can look half smart because, like we said, our AFC pick was way off. But I do think it'll be a close game just because I think the Cowboys defense is playing really good. A lot of people aren't talking about them. But at the end of the day, I think the Saints the Rams are the better team, and I think the Rams come out on top.
I want to say I picked the Saints I picked the Saints to win the Super Bowl, and you picked the Rams to go. So, anyway, those are four fantastic games that we'll have this weekend. The AFC/NFC championship games are going to be really interesting. There are a lot of potential intriguing matchups, and it's going to be another great weekend of football for sure. All right, Jack, is there anything else before we get out of here on this emergency pod that you want to discuss?
Well, I made my picks. Are you going to make your picks?
See, I was trying to get out of here without making picks. All right, I guess I will. I think the Chiefs are going to handle the Colts. I know the Colts have been playing really well, but I just have so much faith in Patrick Mahomes that I really have no. I think they'll have no problem handling the Colts at home. I think the Saints will finally be able to stop St. Nick and that magic down there in New Orleans. I'll take the Rams over the Cowboys, and then I will take the Chargers over the Patriots. I really think that this is Phillip Rivers' time. He's never beaten Tom Brady. He's 0-7 against Tom Brady. Now would be a heck of a time to get your first win to advance to the AFC Championship game. And Phillip Rivers deserves to go to the Super Bowl, and this might be his last chance to do that with all the other young quarterbacks coming up and all the other guys. So it should be very interesting for sure. All right, Jack, anything else?
Nope, we're good, man.
All right, go ahead and plug what you need to plug so we can get on out of here.
As always, follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle and check out my site, thenorthcoastsports.com, for all the latest on Cleveland sports.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. You can find our podcast on pretty much any platform that you can think of that you use to listen to podcasts, including Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. We always appreciate you guys listening to us. We appreciate any feedback that you're willing to give us. So be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We absolutely appreciate it. And, it's nice that we have a new head coach. And, as we get out of here, I'll leave you with this as I do at the end of every episode, and even more so today with Freddie Kitchens as a new head coach. And that is, go Browns.